Welcome back to Dumbest in the Room. After a brief hiatus, I'm here with James Strickland, who has a background in chemistry, but today we're going to focus on his time as a volunteer EMT. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
You know, I was looking at your CV, James, and I didn't know anything about what was on there.
Well, I didn't know anything about it either when I started.
So let's go over your CV a little bit. So you have patents, you have been vice president of different companies. Tell me about that.
Well, I started out as a scientist, and as time went on, moved into patent law and became head of the patent department at another company, and then from there moved into scientific management. So my whole career I've always been involved with science, either working at the bench or managing other people, and eventually becoming vice president of a R&D organization.
What, research and development?
Yeah.
So what kinds of stuff did you do there?
Well, it was for U.S. Smokeless Tobacco Company, which were the makers of Copenhagen and Skoal. And so I was responsible for all product development activities associated with those products, as well as the research on the products themselves. Eventually, we were bought in 2009 by Altria, which is in Richmond. They are the makers of Marlboro and Black and Mild cigars. And so I moved my R&D organization from Nashville, Tennessee to Richmond and just continued to work there, eventually becoming responsible for all of Altria's traditional products.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. I mean, that's big time. So what we're going to talk about today is your volunteer work, which is with the Virginia Beach Rescue Squad as an EMT. So how did you transition from your smokeless tobacco products to being an EMT?
Well, I was an EMT when I was 18 in North Carolina, which is where I grew up. I left North Carolina when I was 18 and lived in various parts of the country as I was getting my education and as I was, following my career path. When I retired from Altria, which was in February of 2019, I moved back to Virginia Beach. I had owned a home in Virginia Beach for, at that point, about 8 years. I would come down on weekends, but I lived in Richmond. And so since I had decided to move down here full time, I didn't know anyone, and I figured that was a good way to get integrated into the community. The other part of it as well is that my son volunteered for Virginia Beach Rescue Squad and was with them for 7 years. In fact, it was a real honor for me that I got to run one shift with him before he moved. He did it all through his undergraduate career, which was at Christopher Newport University, and then he also did it through his medical school career, which was at EVMS. And then in June of 2019, he moved to Cleveland, Ohio to do a residency in pediatrics. He's now applying actually for fellowships to get back into emergency medicine and be like a pediatric ER physician. So he had done it and he had a great experience with it and really enjoyed the patient interactions. It also seemed to help him get to know a lot of people in the community. And so I just tried to grow up to be like my son.
That's awesome. So we're currently in Virginia Beach where you do it. So when did you start in Virginia Beach doing it? What year was that?
It was in 2019. I went to Tidewater Community College and did 3.5-week basic EMT course. Finished that up like in the beginning of April. I took the national exam and started running in April of 19. So it's been about 2.5 years.
How had things changed since you were 18 doing it?
Oh, quite a bit. Some things haven't changed at all. I mean, some of the equipment you had when you were 18, you still have it today. But, the whole advent of electronic medical reports, the whole mobile data terminal that shows you, the information in regards to where the call is and what the issue is. The Life Pack, which allows you to do an enormous number of things from EKGs to blood pressures to pulse oxes to transmit EKGs to the hospital to AEDs. There have been a lot of advantages and advances, in 40 years, which you would expect.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about all this technology in the ambulance, and the one thing that stood out to me was where the call is. I mean, do you have kind of something in the ambulance that's kind of a built-in map
Yeah, it's called a GPS unit that we hang on the window.
I told you I was the dumbest one in
No,
here.
it's okay. Yeah, I mean, so you get the address, right? And basically when you get a call, you understand what the chief complaint is. You have some history depending on what the caller gives the dispatcher. You have an address, and you have an idea of what other units are going to the call. So in some cases, they'll just send an ambulance. If it's a priority one call, they'll send a zone medic as well as a fire engine. And 9 times out of 10, the fire engine gets there before we do because there are a lot more fire stations in Virginia Beach than there are rescue stations. And so you have an idea who's coming, you have an idea of what the main complaint is. In some cases, if it's a cardiac arrest, they'll tell you that CPR is in progress, and those you try to get to in a hurry.
Wow. So you mentioned the priorities. What are the different priority levels?
Well, there's 3, priority 1, 2, and 3. Priority 1 is, as I said, where it's a critical, acute situation. So where minutes really matter. And so they'll send a zone medic, which is a paramedic, and they'll send a fire engine. And in many cases, there may be paramedics on the engine. There's certainly EMT basics on the engine. And then they'll send the ambulance. So it just depends on what the call is. Priority 2 is that they'll just send an ambulance because it's not as acute of a call at the moment. And so the primary role for those are just, to assess them, to determine whether or not the caller actually gave an accurate description of what was going on. Because there have been times when we've been at calls that were priority 2 calls, and we get there and things are not as the caller made it appear. So, for example, grandma fell. So, okay, well, grandma fell, so we'll send an ambulance and we'll get it there. Well, when you get there, you realize grandma's having a heart attack or grandma's had a stroke, and the things are much more serious than what you realized. Mm-hmm. Priority 3 calls are, my thigh's hurting, and it's been hurting for 4 days, and my doctor said I needed to go to the hospital. And those are more, I guess, medical transport than anything else.
Yeah. So what kind of would be the breakdown of like percentage? How many do you get? More priority 1s, 2s, 3s?
Well, I don't have the actual percentages, but at least in my experience, it's probably 50 to 60% priority 2s, and and 40 to 50% priority 1s. You don't get a lot of priority 3s.
Yeah, I would hope not, because that would be kind of drive yourself to the hospital kind of thing.
Yeah, that happens, and in some cases too, the city gets really busy. I mean, there are times when there are actually ambulances. There are calls holding because there are more calls than there are ambulances to take care of them. And the way the system's organized is that there are 2 chiefs. One is called EMS 1 and then EMS 2. EMS 2, which is predominantly the person that I function under, is everything from basically Rosemont back to the oceanfront. And so if there are lots of calls holding, someone's in a nursing home and they haven't been able to get someone to pick them up. Sometimes EMS2 will actually call medical transport companies to come and pick them up and take them to the hospital, particularly if it's not an acute situation, because there are other more pressing calls holding.
So talk about the busy. You said sometimes it's busier than others. I imagine the summer is probably pretty busy. I mean, are there holidays that things kind of spike? And
yeah, it's directly related to the population. The interesting thing is, though, is that it really varies from day to day. There are some days when I've left, our shifts run from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night, and then 6 p to 6 a. I don't do night shifts. I do day shifts. And there have been times when I've left the station at 6:30 in the morning and didn't get back until 6 o'clock that night, because you go to the hospital, you then clear that call, and as soon as you clear that one, there's another one that comes over and that you got to go take. Most routinely, though, it starts with some intensity around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. Seems like you get a little bit of a break between 2 and 3, and then it cranks back up again. So, but every day is different. And, and the other thing that's really interesting is that, and I don't have any data for this, but just anecdotally, there are days that seem to be theme days. So you'll have 4 or 5 heart attacks in a day. And then another day, it's like fall day. There's just multiple fall calls where people have fallen. Other days it's suicide day, where you'll have 6 or 7 suicides or attempted suicides in a day. And there's, at least in my mind, there's no rhyme or reason to it, but there are days there are clear themes that run throughout the day. And it's not just at the oceanfront. I mean, these are calls that are like all over the city. So, and I don't know what causes that. It'd be an interesting project in statistics to go back and look and see if that's true, but it certainly seems that way.
Yeah, maybe it's with the full moon. People say the full moon.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
So you mentioned it kind of spikes around 8 or 9. I mean, that sounds like it's drive time. I mean, are they predominantly car accidents at that time? Or?
No, I think it's just people waking up
Yeah.
in the mornings and getting around and realizing that they don't feel well.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's people not waking up, and a family member finding them and realizing that something's not right.
Yeah. What is kind of the most frequent call that you get?
Well, I think that it's probably somewhat of a chronic medical issue, that they don't feel right and something doesn't seem normal to them. And so they want to get checked out. A lot of what we do at our level is actually more reassurance than anything else. People want to know that they're okay. And if they wake up and they don't feel right, they're going to call 911. And in many cases, if they want to go to the hospital, we'll take them to the hospital. In many cases, it may not be completely necessary. And in some cases, once you kind of explain to them that as far as you can see, they're okay, they'll say, okay, well then I don't need to go. And they'll do a refusal and you go on your way. But, there are real medical crises that occur. I mean, there are people who have seizures and have heart attacks and strokes and there are car accidents where people really do get hurt. But I think a lot of what we do is, if it's possible, and again, that depends on, the situation, but a lot of what we do is just reassure people that they're okay.
So the Virginia Beach Volunteer Rescue Squad is entirely run on donations, correct?
Yes.
So, okay, so you mentioned people just want to go sometimes to the hospital and they don't need to. A lot of like memes that I'll see on the internet are, sometimes people want to avoid the ambulance because it costs so much. Is there a cost associated for Virginia Beach Rescue Squad to take somebody to the hospital?
No, we will pick up anyone from anywhere and we will take them to the hospital, and there's no charge. Since it is all volunteer, at least, people at my level who run on the ambulances, we don't get paid. All of the equipment and everything is either donated through the community or through, state grants or other forms of donations. And so we don't charge anything at all. And I think that's really a great way to do it, because I think a big part of the community service aspects of this is being there for the community and reassuring the community that they can call and they don't have to make a decision between their health and their cost. Now, when they get to the hospital, obviously all that changes, right? But if we come to your house and because you're not feeling right and we check you out and we say, don't really see anything here that's wrong. If you want to go to the hospital, we'll be happy to take you. But, I don't see anything that indicates an emergency at the moment. Well, then they'll sign a release and we'll leave and there's no cost to them. And so I think that's a huge benefit in maintaining the overall public health of this community.
Okay, so how does it, I know there's like maybe, I don't know if for-profit is the right word, but I see like the blue ambulances and the medical transport ones. Are those kind of paid ones probably? Oh,
they are paid and they're medical transport. So, let's say that you have someone in a nursing home that needs to go to the hospital and we're not available. Well, they'll call a medical transport company and they'll come pick them up and they'll take them to the hospital. Let's say that, someone is transferring from the hospital and going to a rehab facility, or some other place like that, or a nursing home. A lot of times medical transport will do those, and those do charge.
What about, I know at concerts and stuff, or, big events, something in the water and all those kinds of things. There's rescue there just in case.
Yeah. We typically what we'll do is that we'll have an ambulance on standby. We also have carts that run up and down the boardwalk that will assist people who walk up to us if we get a call on the radio that there's something going on, because we can get there really fast. At concerts, I know I went to not something in the water. I went to the Patriot Festival a couple of years ago, and I had a backpack on and a radio, and I just kind of walked through the crowd, and if anybody had an issue or a question, I tried to help them. Again, all that's free. It's tourism is such a huge part of the economy here in Virginia Beach. I look at a lot of this as just being an ambassador for the city. Mm-hmm. It's not unusual to get a call down at the oceanfront and have someone from another city or another state or even another country. And for me, I always enjoy those calls because I get to meet the people, I get to hear where they're from, and I look at it as a real opportunity to show the best side of Virginia Beach, to really be an ambassador for the city, to help them feel comfortable with whatever they have going on. Because when you're on vacation and something happens, that's pretty stressful. If you don't know the city, you don't know the hospitals, you don't know the system, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get a huge bill because I had to call 911. And at least for our services, none of that happens. It's trying to make them as comfortable as we can and trying to, help them feel as secure as they can, so that, they can walk away with a really good impression of the city.
Again, anecdotally, how does, tourists versus Virginia Beach residents compare to who's calling?
Well, the residents call, most often.
Yeah.
You'll get a call at the oceanfront every now and then. Most of the time when you get a call at the oceanfront, it's probably on average a little more severe because, people don't call until they really, really need it. Mm-hmm. But the population of the city is huge relative to the number of people at the oceanfront. So, most of the calls are out and about throughout the city versus at the oceanfront per se, at least during days and during the week, which is when I run. So I really don't know what happens on the weekends or at nights, but at least I typically try to run every Tuesday and Thursday. And at least my experience has been is that, you'll get a call at the oceanfront maybe, once a day or once, a week, at least with the 2 shifts that I run. And most of the calls are out in the city.
So you run Tuesdays and Thursdays. So talk about kind of the time commitment. Obviously, you're doing 2 days a week. Is that typical?
No, I mean, the requirement is that you only have to run 4 shifts a month. But I'm retired, and I've got plenty of time. And so I like to run Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I sort of build my week around those days. So, I have to, for example, I have a shift in the morning. So I'll get up at 4:30. I need to leave my house by about 5:10. I'll get to the station at 5:30. We got to check off the truck. Want to be signed on by 6. And I'd like to get there early enough that if there is a call, that we can take it. Because the worst thing in the world is to get to the end of your shift. It's 5:30, 5:45, whether it be AM or PM, and you get a call, and the other crew's not there to take it. Yeah. And now you got to leave at 5:45, and you're not going to get back till 7:30. And it's like, I've already been here 12 hours. I don't want to be out here anymore. Yeah. So out of respect for the people who do nights, because a lot of them, they'll run a night shift, and then they'll take a shower, and they'll go to work the next day. Mm. So out of respect for them, I try to get there at 5:30 so that if something comes in, and if my partner's there, we can take it so they can go home.
So when you're doing these checks, when you first get there, what are you doing? What are you checking? Yeah.
So you have to go through first, and at least the way I do it is to go out and check the whole outside of the ambulance. Does it have a flat tire? Are all the lights working? Does it have enough gas? Is there anything, odd about the truck itself? And then once you check the outside, you have to check the inside. And the inside is making sure that you have all the equipment and all the supplies necessary. And it's kind of easy because, everything is tagged and there's an inventory list, and you just go through and make sure everything is on the list. Because the last thing you want to do is to get somewhere and you have some rarely used piece of equipment that you now need, and you didn't check it off, and it's not there or it's not functioning properly. Because when you need it, you really need it because you're in a crisis. Mm-hmm. And so it's basically just making sure that everything you have is there, that is up to date, that you have a large enough quantity so that if there was something really severe, you wouldn't run out, and that the truck's ready to go. And then you sign in and you just sit at the station until you get a call. And and typically, you'll get it depends. I mean, some days, you start getting calls at 6:00. Some days you don't get a call till late. So I'll typically just lay on the couch and take a nap.
Yeah, I don't blame you. So speaking of equipment, one thing that I've seen that has stood out to me, I haven't seen it in person. I've only seen it on TV, is the thing, and that when I saw it was in the Derek Chauvin trial with George Floyd, the machine that
Yeah, the Lucas.
Is that something that you use
Yes.
on a regular basis?
Well, I mean, you don't use it on a regular basis because it's only used when somebody's in cardiac arrest. So we had a call last week where we were doing CPR on a patient because they were in cardiac arrest. And, after about 10 minutes, you get tired. I mean, you're really only supposed to do CPR for a couple of minutes and then you switch out. But when it's going to be a long, drawn-out affair, then you hook this Lucas device up to them, and it does CPR for you. And it's very rhythmic, very routine, very consistent. And so that gives you an extra, it frees up a set of hands or a couple of sets of hands to do other stuff. And all of our trucks have Lucas devices on them. And they're very helpful because, as I said, CPR is very exhausting if you're going to do it efficiently and do it correctly. And then also, the CPR is not real easy on the body that you're doing CPR on, whereas this device is a little more consistent, doesn't move around, so I think there's less of a chance of injury with the Lucas device than there is probably with manual CPR.
Yeah, I got CPR certified through work, and somebody else in my class said that they did CPR back when they were a teenager and broke somebody's ribs.
It happens.
Yeah.
It happens. That's a really strange feeling and I don't know that it's breaking ribs as much as it is, sort of like cracking your knuckles because of the cartilage that attaches the ribs to the sternum. But that's just a really odd feeling. I hate that feeling. It's kind of a squishy. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but I know what it feels like, and I don't like it.
Is that more in older people?
Not necessarily. It just depends. It depends on the age of the person, and depends on their body type, whether how rigid they are. I mean, it just depends. There are some common rules that you can apply, but there's a lot of individuality in some of this stuff too.
One thing I just thought of is, I don't know, do you run out of the one by the second precinct of the police station?
Yeah, sometimes the Station 14, which is by the second precinct, it's on, I think it's like 780 Virginia Beach Boulevard. The sister station for that is Station 8, which is over by Virginia Beach General Hospital. And so if you turn on Bain Drive, there's a firehouse there, and then you have the rescue station, and then you have the library, and then across, I guess, is Lynn Haven Middle School. Mm-hmm. So when I schedule to run, I get assigned either at 14 or at 8.
Gotcha.
Sometimes if we have enough people who show up, or who request to run that particular shift, they'll also man a crew down at Station 3, which is over by Lynn Haven Mall, and that's in a firehouse over there.
The reason I asked about Station, 14, you said, is the homeless shelter is right across the street almost, Judeo-Christian Outreach Center. And I was going to ask, homeless people, they might not have a phone to call 911 if they're out on the street. So, or if somebody, has a medical emergency, is that something that you just spot? Does somebody call and say, I saw somebody pass out.
Well, you get a lot of calls where some, citizen will call in and say, hey, there's somebody laying in the grass. Most of the times they won't approach them. Most of the times those people are asleep. They're homeless people who are just asleep on the street or in the grass or whatever. We have had situations where people have walked up to the station and said, I'm not feeling well. I know we had a situation last summer where some guy was, he was a worker and he was living in his truck and he hadn't felt well all night long. And he drove his truck up to the station. He says, I'm not feeling well. And he was having a heart attack. So, it just depends. Citizens here in Virginia Beach are actually pretty empathetic and very involved. So it's not unusual to get a call of someone, laying on a street corner or laying in the grass or whatever. And by the time, before even we get there, fire has gotten there or the police have gotten there and they said patient was asleep and we get canceled and we just go back to the station. But I have been on calls where, I know there was one call down at the oceanfront last year where someone was in a culvert between a lot and the back of a building, and he had been beaten pretty severely. And my guess is that, fortunately, it was a holiday, and fortunately, someone who was in the office in front of the culvert heard a moaning sound and went back there and saw someone lying back there. And my guess is that he would have probably died if he hadn't been found because he was in pretty bad shape.
Wow, that's crazy. So you mentioned, people call and they say they see somebody laying in the grass and they don't approach. I've definitely been one to call and not approach, because nowadays I guess you just don't know what
you don't know what's going on.
And one thing I remember from my aunt Amy, who connected us, is when she was training, the BSI, or I don't know if that's right, is my scene safe?
Yeah. Well, BSI is body substance isolation, but your first obligation is to yourself. So you've got to make sure that your scene is safe. You've got to make sure that you're safe. I know that it's, people seem to think that, you drive the ambulance with reckless abandonment, but that's not really true. The reality of it is that fire is going to get there before you get there, most likely. Better for us to be 30 seconds late than to not get there at all. So I don't have a tendency to drive probably as fast as others do or as risky as others do, because I know that somebody else is going to get there, and better for me to get there than never get there at all.
Yeah. Talk about the rules for driving the ambulance, because obviously you got to get there as fast as you can. If somebody's going to get there before you, I guess that takes a little bit of the pressure off. But
the rules are that you have to be trained, you have to be certified to drive the ambulance. If you're going with lights on, you have to have your siren on. Now, we'll turn the siren off when we get into a neighborhood or something like that that's not quite so busy. When you come up to a stoplight, you turn the siren off, because the last thing you want to do is be responsible for pushing the car out into the middle of an intersection and it getting T-boned. When you go through a school zone, if the lights are flashing, you have to slow down to 25 miles an hour, just like everybody else, and you have to turn the siren off. So the lights and sirens are really requesting permission for the other drivers to yield, but that doesn't always happen. And one of the things, I had an intern last week, and I was saying, look, there's 4 kinds of drivers, okay, that you're going to meet. One, there are people who know what to do and they do it. They know to move over, to get out of the way. There are those who do exactly the opposite of what they should do. There are those who think they can outrun you. And then there are those who just stop. And the closest I've ever come to getting into an accident where I had to lock up all the tires and all the brakes was somebody who just stopped right in front of me because they panicked and they didn't know what to do. And it was a 4-lane road, so they could easily move to the right, but they didn't. They just panicked and they stopped. And so, driving an ambulance is the epitome of defensive driving, because you just don't know what these folks are going to do. And ambulances do get in accidents. I mean, they do. Fortunately, I've never had an accident, but it does happen, and you really have to pay attention to what people are doing, because they're completely, totally unpredictable. But they're going to fall into one of those 4 categories most likely.
Explain the right thing to do
Get there safe.
for other drivers.
Oh, well, the right thing to do is, if you can, move over, and get out of the way. But that doesn't always happen.
I always feel awkward because maybe it's a 3-lane road and there's a turn lane. Maybe the turn lane's open and the ambulance kind of starts heading towards the turn lane. Is it best to just stay where you are and let the ambulance go in the turn lane and then pass everybody?
Yeah, because what will end up happening sometimes is that, and this is what's really crazy. So let's say you got a 4-lane road. Well, you'll have one person who stops, and then you'll have in that lane, and then another person behind them in the other lane who stops. And now you can't even weave through them because they've stopped so close to each other in both lanes that there's no hole for you to get through. Mm-hmm. And so it's a real adventure. It's just moving over is just the easiest thing to do. To try to get out of the way, but it doesn't always work that way.
All right, I have a scenario for you. So London Bridge and Virginia Beach Boulevard. If you're heading from London Bridge to Great Neck.
Okay.
And you're under the underpass or the overpass, and an ambulance is behind you, and you're at a red light. Where you got the pillars on each side. So
you're going to have to wait till the light changes. Yeah, because as a driver, I know that they are trying to get there, and that's fine. I mean, the people in the ambulance are trying to get to the call, but I'm not going to pull out in the intersection and get in a car accident because of an ambulance behind me. The other thing is too, and it's not true in all cases, but our ambulances have a device on them called an Opticon. And what I mean is that, by it not being true in all cases, a lot of intersections have these devices that will recognize the signal being sent from that Opticon, and it'll change the lights. And so, you're coming up and the light just turned red. Well, when you get close enough, that Opticon will cause the lights to turn green again, and then the traffic can get moving and you can get through.
So same scenario, cars are under the underpass, ambulance is behind them, the light turns green, clear out, going straight. How do you know which way the ambulance is going to go?
Well, we're supposed to use our turn signals, right?
How do you differentiate that from the other flashing lights?
Well, because the turn signals are a different color. They're yellow. But, I mean, you just have to, at least for me, when you're driving the ambulance, I just try to be patient. The thing that gets me is when people do sudden erratic moves, or they do exactly the opposite of what they should do. And, but I'm not going to hit them with the ambulance. I'm going to, give them an opportunity to get out of the way, because we'll get there. And 10 seconds is not going to make that big a difference. Mm-hmm. It just isn't.
Talk about the relationship between the rescue squad and fire and police.
Well, we all interact together. The police is there predominantly to handle any investigatory issues, to make sure the scene is safe, to handle any post issues. So, for example, if you get there and someone has died on the scene, and you'll do what you can to try to retrieve them or revive them, but if you've declared them dead, we leave. Police has to deal with the body, they have to deal with the scene, they have to deal with any investigations that go on into the cause of death or any potential foul play. Fire often gets there pretty quickly. In some cases, they may just have BLS providers on the fire truck. In some cases, they have paramedics. In those cases, I think I always try to defer to the paramedic. Once the zone medic gets there, who is a paramedic, and they're paid for by the city, I think everybody sort of defers to the zone medic, because this is what they do full time. The fire provides a great service in that they can quickly get there and get started before we can. By the time we get there, they're telling us what's going on. They're giving us the first set of vitals. They're giving us the information that they have. When the zone medic gets there, he's sort of the in charge of everything that goes on, because while there are paramedics on the fire trucks, they also do other things besides paramedic work. Whereas the zone medics, that's all they do every day. 3 days in a row, 12 hours a day, and I got to tell you, I mean, this is a really, really good system here. We can do, if you're having a heart attack, we can do everything for you in the field or in the back of the truck that they can do for you in the emergency room. The only thing is that obviously if you need to go have a stent put in or something like that, you need to be in the emergency room. But the zone medics here are extremely competent. They are really nice people. They're very good at what they do. And, certainly as I'm getting older in age, I take a lot of comfort in realizing that, this is a good system. Virginia Beach has the largest volunteer rescue system in the country.
Wow.
And, but it's also highly competent. And in some cases, depending on the day, we even have physicians that run rescue. They call them MD1 and MD2. So it's not unusual if there's a physician available because they had a day off and they decided wanted to run rescue that day. It's not unusual to get to a really bad call and see a doctor show up right there on scene. I had a call about a month ago where a guy had a heart attack, and there was a physician that showed up with actually a portable ultrasound, and he was looking at the guy's heart to see if there was a heartbeat.
Wow.
Unfortunately, that gentleman passed away, but it's just the level of competence and the level of equipment and the application of all that, I have found it to be very, very impressive.
Yeah, sounds awesome. Who makes the determination between, say, going to Virginia Beach General, or Norfolk General, maybe Nightingale?
Yeah. So typically what we try to do is take you to the closest available hospital. Now, that doesn't always work, okay? Because Beach General doesn't like to take maternity patients because they don't really have any OBGYNs on staff. Mm-hmm. So if you're pregnant, particularly more than 25 weeks pregnant, Beach General is not going to take you. So in that case, we have to go to Princess Anne. Well, if you have a trauma and you're more than 25 weeks pregnant, Princess Anne's not going to take you because of the trauma. So in that case, we have no choice but to go to Norfolk General. Some of it just depends on the severity of the call and the condition of the patient. But Beach General will pretty much take 95% of patients. But it really depends. I mean, I've had times when these were young kids having seizures, having other issues, and I'm like, if this was my kid, I'd want him to go to CHKD. Mm-hmm. And so we take him to CHKD. There have been other times when the trauma has been so severe that we took them to Norfolk because we were on the west side of the city, and that was just a better place to go. So it really depends, on the severity of the patient. Sometimes it depends on patient preference, but if it's really severe, we're going to probably take them to the closest facility.
So it's kind of up to the crew.
Yeah, in most cases it is actually.
I would have thought it would be like dispatch or something, but that's interesting.
No. It's up to the crew.
Wow. So how in contact are you with dispatch through the whole call?
Not very much. They come out with the initial call, and as a way to keep radio traffic down, a lot of things are done over the computer terminals. So, you get the initial call. When you get into the truck and you pull the call up, the dispatcher gets a signal that, you have now received the call. And they'll go over the radio and they will basically read the notes that are on the computer screen in front of you. When you get on scene, instead of calling the dispatcher and telling her that you're there, there's just a button that you press on the computer screen and it notifies dispatch that you're there. When you get ready to leave to go to the hospital, again, another button that you press that says, I'm transporting, and there's a scroll down menu, and you just pick which hospital you're transporting to. And then when you get to the hospital, there's another button that you press. And then when you're done, again, you're available again. So there's another button that you press, and you give a disposition on the patient. There are times when you do need to talk to the dispatcher because you can't find the home. Things are not as you thought they were, so you need other support. But most of the time, they try to keep the radio traffic down as much as they can because there's just a lot of stuff going on in the city.
Yeah.
And if there's something really bad where you've got to have a huge coordination of resources, what they'll do is that they'll take that team off of the main channel and put them onto what's called a TAC channel. And so, they'll assign TAC channel 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. And so, you get off the main channel, you get onto the TAC channel because it's specifically to that call. And that TAC channel is being used by fire, rescue, police, and EMS as a way to kind of coordinate activities amongst themselves. But then it doesn't tie up the main channel, which is, the general call channel.
Speaking of the bigger calls, and you said you started in 2019. I'm not sure when exactly, but the mass shooting we had in Virginia Beach.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a Friday, I think, right?
It was on a Friday. Yeah, I was at Station 14 because I was going to go work the Patriot Festival that was at the oceanfront that day. And so I didn't go on that call, but I was there when the call came in.
So what did you hear from others, like how that was?
It was pretty horrific.
Yeah.
And, that's the thing that I think that doesn't get talked about very much. Most of our calls are pretty routine and the patients are conscious and you get a chance to talk to them. And I've had some really interesting stories of some fascinating patients that I've met. But then there's some of them that stick with you. For me, back in November, I had a 4-month-old who died, and that was really, really hard.
Yeah.
I had a patient who died last week. That was, similar to my daughter. That was hard for me. So it's not every call, but some of them, at least they get to me. I don't know if they get to other people or not, but some of them just are a little too close to home. But then there's other ones that this is just a fascinating way to really meet interesting people because I don't care what your education is. I don't care what your socioeconomic level is. You get a call, we're going. Mm-hmm. And some of the people are incredibly interesting. And I've met some unbelievably nice people doing this and heard some just fascinating stories about their lives and their children and things like that. And those are really precious. I really value those stories.
Yeah. So, the child death, that I can't even imagine. And my fiance is she's now a pediatric oncology nurse, but she did, her OB clinical, and she had to, bathe a baby who had died in birth. And that, the other day she said she was thinking about that. So, I can't imagine the things you guys
it was hard. It was hard. The worst part, this was in November of last year, and the worst part is I was down the hall, and unfortunately, we did everything we could, but at least to me, it was pretty obvious that we were not going to be successful. I was cleaning up the stretcher, and I heard the mom scream, and I knew that they had just told the mom that the child had passed, and that really bothered me because I've got grandchildren. That was hard.
Yeah, I bet. Wow. Does the city offer any kind of therapy or anything for you guys?
Yeah, there's an EAP program. I've never felt the need to take advantage of it. I would assume that there were a lot of people who took advantage of it after the shooting at the courthouse.
Yeah.
Because that was pretty traumatic. But I'm able to sort of process on my own because it was funny. I called my son after this 4-month-old died because he's in pediatrics and do it in his residency. And I'm like, yeah, how do you deal with this? He's like, well, you just have to tell yourself you did the best you could. And there was nothing else you could do. That helped me process it. It didn't make it any less difficult, but at least it gives you a way to kind of get to a point where you're like, okay, I got to let it go. I did all I could.
Yeah. Let's switch gears to a happier story. Do you have any like amazing happy stories that you are able to tell?
I've had some fascinating interactions with some patients that have just really stood out with me. I know there was one woman, she was in her late 90s, and and I really enjoy dealing with the elderly, because I think that the elderly in many cases are sort of an underserved population. And she was sitting in the chair and didn't know it at the time, but there were 2 or 3 things that were actually very seriously wrong with her. And she couldn't get up, and I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a big hug, and we're just going to dance over to the stretcher. And when I got her out of the chair and held her tight so she wouldn't fall, she pulled her head back and she looked at me. She said, "Do you have any idea how long it's been since someone's hugged me?" That was heart-wrenching for me. And so, I continued to work with her. We got her to the hospital, and she sort of told me her whole life story, that her and her husband had been married for 65 years. He had passed away in 2014. He was a B-17 pilot in World War II, got shot down over Romania and spent 2 years in a German prisoner of war camp. Just a fascinating story. I had a patient the other day that her husband had been in the Hanoi Hilton for 7 years during the Vietnam War, had been in isolation in solitary for 43 months of that 7 years, and had been in shackles for like 36 of those 43 months. I mean, there's just some really fascinating people out there.
Yeah.
And so that part of the job is actually really fun. It's these anecdotal stories that just add a richness to it all, that go well beyond whatever medical condition they have going on. The chance to connect at a human level, the power of just presence. There have been people that I've just held their hand all the way to the hospital because they were upset. The ability to be there and to give them, the gift of presence, and to help them feel secure and to help them feel like they're going to be okay, is a really powerful tool. And you don't get very many thank yous, but sometimes you do. And you can tell that the people are incredibly appreciative. You took a bad situation and helped them get through it. And that's, at least for me, that's pretty rewarding.
You mentioned the word socioeconomic earlier, talking about the people. I mean, I guess it's kind of eye-opening to see all different
Everybody gets sick.
Yeah.
Everybody gets in accidents. Pain knows no social level. So it's, and for me, all of these people are human beings, and they all deserve human dignity. So I don't care, if we're going to the most swanky area of the city, or if we're getting somebody off the street. Everybody deserves to be treated with human dignity.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true. Talk about kind of, you mentioned your son ran on the ambulance, and now he wants to be in the emergency department. So what is that kind of typical for people to use this as a stepping stone to?
It can be. I think that there's probably 3 types of providers that I've seen. There are those who are in college, they're younger, they want to go to nursing school, or they want to go to PA school, or they want to go to medical school. And so they need this for service hours, and they need it. I think actually, in order to even be able to apply to PA school, you've got to have like 2,000 hours of patient contact.
Wow.
So this is a big way for them to do that. And then you've got people who are just very community oriented, and they're more in the middle-aged type range, and they just want to be a part of the community, and they do this and they enjoy it. And then you got people like me who are retired, And, and I know that there's several that live down near where I live, 4 or 5 actually. And they run rescue because it's something to do, and it's a way to give back to the community, and it's interesting, and it fills the time for them. And for me, I would much rather be running rescue than sitting at home, because I don't go to work anymore because I'm retired. So I think most people fall into one of those 3 categories. They're either using it as a professional stepping stone, they're just very civically oriented, or they're retired and they have the time, and so they do it that way as well. But it's a fabulous community of people to interact with, and I've been really privileged because it's a great opportunity for somebody of my age and my experience to be a coach and a mentor. I've written letters of recommendations for medical schools. I've done mock interviews for people. I've reviewed presentations for people. And why not? These are good people. So, if I can do something to help them out, I'm certainly happy to do it. So it's been a great way to build community.
Yeah. There's one guy I went to high school with. You might know him, Drew Grahan. No, I think he was Station 14. I'm not sure what he's doing now, but I watched him. I haven't talked to him in years, but I've watched him on Facebook kind of take the steps with the rescue squad. So it's kind of cool.
Well, it was funny. I was talking to my son a few weeks ago, and he was doing his rotation in emergency medicine. And of all the residents there, only he and one other person had ever spent any time, doing EMS work. Because he was with, the station for 7 years. And he's like, Dad, it was so obvious the difference between her and I versus all the other residents who had never spend any time, doing any kind of rescue work. Because, when you have, ambulances bringing in little kids to an emergency room, I'd seen that before. I knew what that looked like. I knew what questions to ask. I knew what to expect. Whereas the other residents, they'd never done that. So they just had no idea. And so it's a really, really good investment of time. The other thing is too, is that, all my neighbors know that I run rescue. And so if they got any problem at all, they come over to the house or they call me, can you come check me out? And in many cases, I've said, look, I think you're okay. I think you're going to be all right. But there have been some cases where I've actually said, no, I think you need to go to the hospital. Let me call 911 for you, and I can give all the information to this dispatcher. And I said, chances are, where I live, there's going to be somebody coming from 14. And so I'll wait here till they get here, and I can give them a report and kind of tell them what's going on. And so it's, not only do I think we provide a great service for the community while we're on duty and in the truck, but I've been really surprised how important my neighbors find it that I run rescue as well, because it gives them a little bit of an added sense of security, because they know if anything goes wrong, that they can call me and I'll be there in a few minutes, and at least kind of do an initial assessment to say, okay, how good is this, or how bad is it, and what's really going on. So it's just it's an aspect of it that I didn't anticipate when I started.
Yeah. Have you been out in the world anywhere, not on duty, and run into something where you've had to jump in?
Yeah, I have actually, because one of the things I do is that I head up the medical response team at my church, and so I've had 2 or 3 patients at church that people that fainted during the service or just didn't feel right, and I've had to go out and check them out, and in some cases I've had to call 911 and have the ambulance come and pick them up. But, the nice part about that is that, and I remember specifically in one particular case, the zone medic that showed up, I knew him. And so, I told her, I said, look, this guy's really good. Okay. If I was sick, he'd be the one I want working on me. So you're in good hands. The people on the ambulances are really good too, because I know them as well. You're going to be okay. Let them take you to the hospital, get them checked out. But you're in really good hands. And to just see the relief that came over her face, as I did the handoff, that's really valuable because it's, at least I think it is, because she was very very upset, very anxious, and to be able to hand her off like that to people that I knew and that I know are competent, and for her to see my confidence in them gave her confidence, and so it just helped her relax, and that's really important.
Cool. I want to jump back for a second to the stepping stone where you're talking about your son had, from his experience with the patients and then seeing, people come into the emergency department. Would you say, anecdotally again, that doing this kind of makes a doctor or a PA more well-rounded? Because one thing that I've heard, on other podcasts and friends who work in healthcare is that there's definitely maybe some unintentional biases in the way that people are treated in the healthcare system. So having seen everybody where they are in the community, do you think that helps in the hospital or doctor's office setting?
Well, I think that the more patient contact you have, probably the better provider that you are. I think that people who started as undergraduates by doing rescue and then went on to medical school or nursing school or PA school or whatever, they've seen people sort of in a raw form. By the time we get them to the hospital, we've packaged them up to some level. And, we've cleaned them up, we've packaged them, we've got the information. But I think, kind of understanding and having the experience of seeing how these things really go in the field, I think it probably gives an inherent better continuity of care. I think that I think there's also probably a certain level of humbleness that comes, and respect as well, that comes from having been a provider in the field at a lower level, and you've just continued to go to school and you've continued to advance. But it's really easy to remember back when you were just a basic EMT as well.
Yeah.
So I think it creates a better sense of collegial interaction, better atmosphere, and and hopefully provides better patient care than someone who just spent their entire life in school working in the lab. And because certainly I feel like that I spent my whole life in graduate work and in the lab and managing other scientists. This has been a whole new dimension for me. That I've really appreciated, because it's given me a much greater sense of the humanity of all of this. There are scientific problems that need to be solved, and there are medical issues that need to be resolved, but there's a human factor to this as well that, certainly in my years of being a scientist, I didn't never see that because that wasn't the area that I was in.
That's exactly what I was thinking you were going to say. Jumping forward again to, you said you were in your church and you'd seen people pass out. I've vaguely heard, I don't know much about, is there a Good Samaritan law? Like, are you protected if...
Yeah. As long as you don't go beyond your training.
Yeah.
You are protected in the state of Virginia by the Good Samaritan law. So, at least at church, I certainly have to make sure that other people who are on the team need to understand what their training is and need to make sure they're certified. I don't have anything. In fact, I just finished building the jump bags for church this week. They're sitting in my foyer, and I'm going to take them there on Sunday. I didn't put anything in the jump bag that I felt would require a standing order from a physician in order to be able to use, because I just don't want to go beyond the Good Samaritan law. So you have to remember a lot of the things that we do. There is a Tidewater Emergency Medical System, what's the right word? Organization. We all practice under a physician's license.
Wow.
And so there are standing orders for things that can be done that we don't have to call in and ask permission for, because we're all working under their license.
Wow.
But basic first aid and basic life support, I think, are probably more covered under just Good Samaritan laws and the fact that you're certified. I mean, I personally carry liability insurance, although it's probably not necessary.
Yeah.
But it's cheap and it's worth it to me to not have to worry about, if I do something accidentally beyond my skill level, or I screw up in some way, that, I'm going to be covered.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Like, would that cover if you were doing CPR and broke somebody's ribs, or is that just collateral damage with their
It depends on how the lawyer would spin it.
Yeah, I guess so. How does, like, when you get to the hospital, talk about the handoff to
Okay. So, once we've got a set of vitals and we kind of understand what's going on, you call the hospital on the radio and you tell them that, you're coming in, that you have a patient that's, whatever their age is, and you tell them what their chief complaint is. You tell them what you've done. You give them a whole set of vitals. You try to give them enough information so they can kind of assess, okay, well, does this person need to go, into the emergency room, or can you take them to triage? So, because the emergency rooms get really backed up. It's amazing how many people go through the emergency room. I know a couple of weeks ago I was at Beach General, and there were 83 patients in the emergency room. And so, the more information that you can give the nurse, the better off you're going to be, because they're going to be able to really determine the level of care that the person needs. So, for example, if you're coming in and somebody's having a heart attack, cardiac arrest, well, you've already sent them the EKG over the network, so they've got a copy of the EKG there. They will have a team standing by, based on what the EKG looks like, to immediately take this patient and do something with them. If it's a potential stroke, they're going to have a doctor standing there who's going to do a quick stroke assessment, and then they're going to call stroke alert, and they're going to immediately take them to CT to get a CT scan. I had a patient a few weeks ago, and I'm like, this guy is showing all the signs and symptoms of being septic. And within 5 minutes of me getting there, they called us a sepsis alert, and had a whole team marshaled to be able to take care of this person because he was not in good shape. So, you get there and you pull up to the desk. They know who you are. You've already given a report. That most of the time they're just trying to find somewhere to put them. Okay, go to this room. When you take them into the room, you transfer them from the stretcher to the bed, and then you give the nurse who comes in report again so that she has a really good idea of what's going on, and then she takes over. Handoff is very, very important, and you have to be really careful of who you hand off to, because there are a lot of people running around the emergency room. There are respiratory therapists, there are X-ray technologists, there are these emergency room technicians. And so you really have to pay attention to the badge and make sure you're turning over to somebody who has a higher skill level than you do. Because it's really easy to mistake, oops, I thought you were a nurse and what you are is an ER tech. Nothing negative about ER techs, but that's not a legal turnover.
Yeah.
And so, you run with a partner. The person who has the patient then works on the report, and the other person, cleans up the ambulance and cleans up the stretcher and gets ready for the next call.
So I guess, is it pretty chaotic, or is it calm? I guess you got to be calm, right?
It's pretty calm.
Yeah.
For the most part, and even if you have like a cardiac arrest or something, you need one chief and you need other people who take orders. So for me, at a cardiac arrest, I try to go in between doing CPR and bagging the patient, because that's within my skill level. It's something that needs to be done. It's something that I can do. It keeps me out of the way, but yet it's something that's important. And so, you just kind of pick a job and just do it and focus on that, because you can't have too many people running the show. It just gets too chaotic.
With CPR and the elephant in the room of COVID, I guess nowadays they're kind of steering away from breaths. Is that true? And then more compressions?
Well, no. We have back valve mask and
thingy squeeze.
Yeah, and we do traditional CPR, but there are filters in line, that supposedly will collect or filter out any virus particles or whatever.
How has COVID changed kind of the way you guys operate?
Well, initially, we had to, we had to wear a N100 mask. And the city was very proactive in that they gave everyone a mask that would prevent viral inhalation. And it's a really, really good mask. It's so good that it'll actually stop body odor. And everybody was test fitted. So to make sure you got the right mask, you were taught how to use it. And I really appreciated that, because I thought the city was being very proactive. They also provided a whole lot of personal protective equipment on the trucks. Now things have relaxed somewhat. You're supposed to wear, you've always supposed to wear gloves. But now you're supposed to wear gloves and a surgical mask and eye protection. So, I think that, initially society didn't really understand what COVID was and how to deal with it. So probably, use the precautionary principle to make sure that, you sort of go overboard to make sure that, you can mitigate the risk. Now I think it's become much more reasonable. But the city was very proactive, and, and EMS, I thought, did a really good job in trying to make sure that we as providers were protected as best we could. I personally never really worried about it. So,
who in the city is making those calls to? Is that the mayor or the
no?
It
was Chief Brazel and his staff. And we would get updates. We'd get videos from Chief Brazel quite often, giving an update on what was going on, any changes to protocols, anything like that. So I thought they did a really, really good job. I mean, the system here is very good. I've been quite impressed. And, and particularly having been an executive in a Fortune 500 company, it's very well managed.
That's great to hear. What advice do you have for anybody who, maybe is retired or maybe is heading into school to be a physician, in regards to possibly joining a rescue squad?
Yeah, I think that if this is something you're interested in, the city will send you to training for free. I didn't go through the city because I didn't want to take 15 weeks. I wanted to do mine as quickly as I could because I'd done it before, and I wanted to just get out on the street. And so I went to TCC and did a 3.5 week course. But the city will send you through the program for free. It's a great shepherding process. So while you're a student, you get to ride on the ambulance a couple of times. And then once you've passed your test, you're an intern. And interns typically take, 12 to 14 shifts before they're released as attendants in charge. So there's a lot of support as you go through it. It's important, because a lot of people go through the system. This is Virginia Beach is the largest city in Virginia. And so, you need at least 10 ambulances on every shift. And it's really hard to get those sometimes. And people have lives and life happens. And so the more people that you can have who are, running rescue, have experience, the greater potential you're going to be able to have a better service for the city. Because people come in and out all the time, right? My son was here for 7 years. He's gone now. There are other people who, they'll run in the summer, but then when, college starts up, they're at Virginia Tech or somewhere else and they have to take off. And so, it's just if it's something you're interested in, it's a really great way to get some real life experience. But I think that, for me, I don't really care about the lights and the sirens and the blood and the gore. I mean, it's just part of it, but that's not what excites me. What really excites me is, I really, particularly being a scientist, really love solving the puzzle. And the question is, do I know what's going on, and have I seen it before, and am I right? And it's what I think's going on, going to be what the physician thinks going on. the other part of it is, again, the people interaction, and it's not the stories from the crazy things you see. To me, it's more the human interest stories of meeting that lady whose husband had been a POW in World War II. Mm-hmm. Meeting the guy who'd been in the Hanoi Hilton for 7 years. For me personally, my mom passed away back in December. I spent a couple of days with her before she got ill, and had a great time, and went in to wake her up on a Sunday morning, and she was unconscious. I did a complete physical on her, and within 5 minutes, I knew what had happened because I'd seen it before. I called 911. I told them exactly what was going on. We took her to the emergency room. I told the physician that, this is what's happened to her. It's terminal, and he's like, well, let me go get a CT scan and I'll come back. And he's like, you're right. I said, yeah, I knew I was right. I've seen it before. The beauty of that is actually he had done his ER residency at EVMS. He'd spent quite a bit of time at Beach General Hospital, and he was very familiar with Virginia Beach Volunteer Rescue System, even though this was in a totally different state. So for me, having had the experience of running rescue, I felt like that I gave her the best care that anybody in the world could have. I mean, there was nothing that could be done, but I helped carry her out of the house in a mega mover. I helped put her on the stretcher. I put the stretcher in the back of the ambulance. That was important to me. Just as her son, that, I had the experience and the knowledge to make sure that she was well taken care of. I try to do that for everybody, because everybody's, somebody's son or daughter or mother or father. And, so that brings a sense of satisfaction to me that I don't know that I could get anywhere else.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was going to ask about like how rewarding it is, but I think you kind of summed it up right there.
Yeah, I mean, when your neighbor calls you and they're not feeling well, and you go check them out, and to see the relief that comes over, their face, because, okay, I'm not dying. It's like, am I going to die? Yes, but not today.
That's fun. I think we about covered it. Thanks for coming by.
My pleasure.
Glad to have you, and glad you're the first one back. You're very interesting, very smart. I'm definitely, like I said, the dumbest one here.
Stop it.